Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. It's like coffee with an analyst, or it could be whiskey with an analyst reading a spreadsheet, linking crime events, identifying a series, and getting the latest scoop on association news and training. So please don't beat that analyst and join us as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
Thank you for joining me. I hope many aspects of your life are progressing. My name is Jason Elder, and today our guest has 6 years of law enforcement analysis experience, with 20 years of military and law enforcement experience overall. She has a bachelor's in history. She's a certified crime and intelligence analyst. She's got her master's in history and a post-certificate in intelligence studies. And because that's not enough, she's currently studying her PhD in criminology from Kaiser University. She was a supervisor all-source intelligence analyst with the U.S. Army Reserve, here to talk about, among other things, veterans in the job market. Please welcome Erica Logan. Erica, how are we doing?
I'm well. How about yourself, Jason?
I am doing very well. It's great to hear from you. It's great to talk to you yesterday during the prep call. It's funny, we were in talks to do a project last year together on education and training that never formulated. I was like, oh, I didn't have you on the podcast. But since we were talking so much last year, it felt in my head that I had already had you on the podcast. But here we are.
Yeah, that's something I feel like maybe we should look at again. Let's revisit that.
Yeah. It's an interesting topic. I always like to talk about education and training and law enforcement analysis, and it's a big part of why analysts network and try to grow.
Exactly.
All right. Well, let's start from the beginning now. How did you discover the law enforcement analysis profession?
Well, I had been active duty Army as an intelligence analyst, and I actually got out in 2015, joined the reserves from active duty, and I went home to my small town of Merced, California, and unfortunately I knew that I wouldn't be able to use my analyst skills in that area until about 2017, when I came across a job for criminal information analyst position with the Merced County District Attorney's Office. Of course, I applied and interviewed and eventually got the job. And that's when I realized I could take my military analytical skills into law enforcement and build a career around that.
I'm curious to go back a little bit farther about your decision to go into the military in the first place. As you think back, what were your goals and aims back then?
Well, I was of that generation that was impacted by 9/11. So when I graduated high school, I knew that school wasn't the thing for me at the time. And my next door neighbor actually was a recruiter. So he got me in, and he got me into a really good job. So I do definitely appreciate him for that, because I could have easily gotten a really terrible job. But at the end, I selected an Intel analyst. And so from 2005 until 2015, I was an all-source intelligence analyst.
Huh. And so go into that a little bit, all-source analysts in terms of the military. I guess it sounds like it's everything, but I'm sure there's limitations to what you were studying.
Well, I definitely think the intelligence fields that make up all source, such as human, which again, those are kind of the major ones that translate over to law enforcement. But when you think of human, it was your undercover guys, right? Or your informants. Those are the human aspect of it. SIGINT, I always think of, like, if you're doing pens and pings on cell tower analysis, those types of things fit more into what would be traditional SIGINT. So my role as an all-source analyst was taking, and there's a plethora of different INTs, as we call them in the intel community, is taking all that information that is out there and deriving an all-source analyst product, which is taking all that information and creating into one.
And so then I guess talk about your transition then. As you mentioned, you weren't sure how your skills would translate, but looking back on it now, how did the military prepare you for the analyst job?
Well, I definitely think it is the discipline
Mm-hmm.
and having some bearing. It's law enforcement. I hate kind of to say it, but it's paramilitary, right? It's very structured,
Mm-hmm.
very rigid, just like the military is. And so it was an easier step into the civilian sector for me to be going from active duty soldier to a civilian in the workforce, but working for law enforcement.
Mm-hmm. So I often say on this show that I think with the military, for those that transfer from the military to law enforcement analysis, that there's a big difference I feel in terms of data. That I feel that in the military, there's so much more documentation, so many written reports for an intel analyst to have at their disposal to be able to read and consume. Whereas in the law enforcement analysis arena, you might have your cases, you might have a records management system, but I just don't think there's as much writing going on at police departments as you would find in the military. Do you agree with that, or do you find differences?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. You're talking from a national perspective, the amount of data that a traditional military analyst has to sort through in a day versus your city or your county or wherever you're at, right? Wherever your focus is, you're never going to be near what these national agencies are going to come across. But like I said before, I feel like a lot of them still fall under the same category. Another thing that I would say translates across both is the intel cycle. It's the same in military and it's the same for law enforcement. Critical thinking, which is heavily pushed in the military, that's exactly what crime analysis is, right? We're critically thinking, we're thinking outside the box so that we can try to figure out what's going to happen next based on the information that we have, and that's based on reliable sources. Another thing is, because in my current position, I am an instructor for the Defense Intelligence Agency, where I help teach the structured analytical techniques. So in saying that, it easily translated into my law enforcement role.
So let's get into your law enforcement role then, because as you mentioned, you weren't sure, but then you get a intelligence analyst role. It's around February 2017. So talk about that transition for you. That maybe let's go back the first couple weeks, month of the job. What was your experience?
Well, it was a brand new unit. There were 6 of us that were hired at the same time. We were employees of the district attorney, but we were actually housed with our gang and narcotic task force. I would say that it was like drinking from a fire hose from the perspective of learning the law enforcement terminology, and we were also thrown in the middle of this huge operation. So we immediately had to hit the ground running. So yeah, it was quick to pick up because again, it goes back to that paramilitary, but at the same time, like I already knew what to do as an analyst.
And so what did you know how to do?
So because of things that I did when I was deployed to Iraq, some heavy SIGINT type operations, when the task force was doing wiretaps or we were pinging phones, I was kind of the go-to person. And then one of the other things was not a lot of people knew about Analyst Notebook. The other analysts didn't know. There was one other guy that was on our team, and he was an all-source analyst too while he was in the Army. He had gotten out and as well. So we were in the same boat. But timelines, being able to use Analyst Notebook for not only link analysis, but timelines. And it was those things that I was able to teach based on my experience with it in the Army to the analysts that were new to the career field.
So was there, I mean, you mentioned the other analyst that was in the military. Was everybody else pretty much civilian or sworn, or were there other former military in there as well?
No. So his name is Baird. So he was in the Army. He was the only other one besides me. We had a gal that was fresh out of college, and then we had a seasoned analyst. She had been at a previous PD. And then we had another analyst that originally was an investigative analyst and translated or transferred over to a criminal analyst. And then we did have a sworn analyst, but he served more as the digital forensics guy, and that was more of his role.
Okay, so it looks like when they put this team of 6 together, they got a variety of skill sets, experience to kind of be a little bit of a well-rounded unit.
Yes,
Okay.
definitely.
All right. So this brings us to your analyst badge story. And for those that may be new to the show, the analyst badge story is a career-defining case or project that an analyst works. So it is this operation that you referred to, Operation Scrapbook, that is your story. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so started off in 2017, and like I said earlier, thrown into this middle of this operation, and it was a big deal. It was about 52 subjects that were ultimately targeted the day of takedown. It was months and months of learning the subjects, putting products together, because ultimately we knew that we were supporting the district attorneys and eventually the state and federal, but it was being prepared for all the possible risks and to know our assigned subjects the best we possibly could. So over that time, because of how many analysts there were, we ultimately were broken down into 10 subjects for the day of takedown. It was very tight-lipped. We had agents from across the state of California that came to support because the intent was to hit all at the same time. It was quite interesting to see everything kind of unfold as it was happening. However, one of my teams notified me that their subject was not at the location. And so because I did my best to learn the ins and out of this guy, I suspected that he was heading to his brother's. So I quickly let them know, like, if he's going anywhere, he's going to his brother's house. So because again, I knew his pattern of life, I knew which directions he was going to go and what streets he would go down, and eventually they were able to catch him on one of the roads that I suggested and ultimately detained him.
Nice. Now, as I mentioned, you start in 2017 with this with the task force, and then this is also taking place in 2017. So how long was it between the time you started to this takedown day that you're referring to?
So, it was, I'd say, probably about 4 months.
Okay. So that's still pretty good. As you mentioned, that you were critically thinking, you are doing your homework, taking the skills and techniques that you learned from the military, and within 4 months making this impact to this operation because you had an alternative location to this suspect.
Right. I mean, and that goes back to my time as an analyst in the military, being overseas. That a large part of what we did is we made target packets on people, which included their patterns of life and their families, and that's what ultimately made it easy because I was already familiar with it.
Sounds like a pretty good success if it was only the one guy that wasn't there when you all came knocking.
Well, out of the 52, I think there was 5 that weren't picked up that morning. When I left the county during COVID, I think we only had 1 outstanding. So there were some pretty good cases there. So, and having to testify to call detail records and surveillance products where I put timelines together was so valuable to the end of this case and making sure that everybody got their time ultimately.
All right. So, as you mentioned, you leave March of 2020, which is COVID. So, was that something? Go into that a little bit because that's a little bit of a risk leaving during the time of the pandemic.
Well, I am a single mother, and so schools were shutting down.
Okay.
And at the time when I had asked for accommodations to telework, it wasn't an option. And so I had no other choice.
Oh, that's a bummer.
So I loved that job.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have gone back in a heartbeat had things been different, for sure.
Yeah. No, that's too bad. I think law enforcement is a little behind the times in terms of embracing work from home. And I think that's unfortunate because I work from home. I know how much I can get done data wise, analysis wise. So
Mhm.
I know there is at least an opportunity, especially maybe even temporarily, given the circumstance. So that's definitely unfortunate situation for you.
Yeah, I think it was a very different time. A lot of people
Hmm.
were still trying to figure out what telework looked like on an
Hmm.
everyday basis. It was just management didn't see it fit at the time. Although we had take home laptops that had all the bells and whistles for us to
Yeah.
support, we were essentially on call because Merced County is such a small rural area.
Hmm.
None of the agencies within the county had their own analysts. And so we, as the team of six of us, served as those agencies' analysts. And so there were plenty of times where, like, Merced PD had their detectives called me and asked me to help out with a homicide, several homicides, or a home invasion. There are things like that. And I supported a lot of Atwater PD's cases. One of the cases was the previous district attorney's son was murdered in broad daylight. And so I was on call for that. So it was like
Hmm.
the capability was there. It was just, I think, from a government perspective, is how do you allow somebody to work from home full time? So,
That makes it even worse when you actually can demonstrate that you have worked investigations in the middle of the night or at all hours of the day
mhm.
and have shown that you have value remotely.
Right.
You know, All right. So then this brings you to San Antonio, Texas.
Yes. In San Antonio, I was starting my life over again. So,
Hmm.
kind of from the bottom, I was focused more on staying in the federal system at the time.
Hmm.
Given that I'm an all source intelligence analyst background, I wanted to keep my security clearance current. And so I took an executive assistant position with the Space Force as a contractor. And then unfortunately, the contract abruptly ended a few months after I took the job. And so I was then hired as a secretary to a lieutenant colonel, Colonel Franta. He was probably the most influential person that I had encountered in quite some time.
Hmm.
He was the one that pushed me to find the career field that I actually wanted to be in. He was
Hmm.
like, "You're a very intelligent person."
Hmm.
He's like, "You are so much more than this job." He's like, "I
Hmm.
see it in you." And so I did. I went home that weekend and was like, "What am I passionate about?" I already knew. I wanted to be an analyst, which is why I started going. I went back to school for my post grad certificate with University of Texas San Antonio for their intelligence studies program. And while I was finishing that up, the Army had posted a job as an investigative analyst, and applied and interviewed and eventually got the job, which took me to Hawaii.
Yeah,
Um,
and that, definitely want to get into that. I do want to go back to the secretary position now, because
mhm.
I think that's an important bit in your history. I mean, I think for the listeners, this is a good example of you just gonna never know what doors are gonna open when. If you're listening to this and maybe you're trying to get into the field and never struggling to get into the field,
Mhm.
just opportunities to get inside the police department can open some doors. So whether it's data entry, 911 operator, records, whatever it may be, sometimes just getting that foot in the door, even though it's not an analyst job. And in your situation, Erica, it wasn't an analyst job, but it definitely led you down the path to becoming an analyst again.
Correct. Yeah, like I said, if it wasn't for Colonel Franta, I don't think I would have pushed myself back into the field. So I am forever grateful for him to push me to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up,
Hmm.
and continuing in that direction.
All right. So you're this California girl that spent a little time in Texas, and then you go over to being surrounded by water. in the Pacific Ocean of Hawaii.
Yeah, I had lived in Hawaii before during
Oh, okay.
my active duty time. It's actually where my daughter was born. It was my last active duty stationed. I was stationed on Pearl Harbor. So going back to my daughter's, I joke, her motherland was really important for her because we left when she was about 15 months.
Okay.
So now she's older and she got to go back home.
Nice. Nice. So just Pearl Harbor for you. I mean, obviously, for those that are after the fact and we read about it in history books, but we obviously hear Pearl Harbor and we think of just the one thing. So, but I guess from your perspective, the Pearl Harbor as it's well known versus the Pearl Harbor that you know.
Yeah, well, it was right across the street from the Arizona.
Hmm.
So a lot of ceremonies took place there. The base itself is a joint base now. It's joint base Pearl Harbor, Hickam being the Air Force side, and Pearl Harbor being the naval side. But yeah, it from an intelligence perspective and as a history major, I loved it because, what happened at Pearl Harbor was an intelligence failure, which the intelligence community eventually learned from, unfortunately, the hard way. But
Hmm.
as a history major, there's so much history, right?
Hmm.
So, but when it comes to the analyst role that I played when I went back as a civilian, it was more of an investigative analyst position for crime prevention in the Army. This is following the Vanessa Guillen case and the Fort Hood findings that the Army did a huge report on, and the expectation of what the military is going to do to protect its service members. And so to be part of that was eye-opening,
Hmm.
because my other roles had just been reaction, right?
Hmm.
A crime occurred, we're investigating it. Where this is what do we do to get left of the boom, so to speak. And so from my perspective, and I fought so hard for the people I worked with to understand, was that you have to be able to look at the crime data, the historical crime data, in order to understand what prevention efforts are needed. Unfortunately, I don't think they ever bought it. And so I kind of foresaw the crumbling of the analyst position within this role. It was public health. And I truly believe that law enforcement and public health are a great combination, could do great things if they believe in one another. And in this case, they didn't see the value in the investigative analyst role, which is
Hmm.
unfortunate. So I left to go be with Army CID with what I thought was going to ultimately be promotional opportunities, but I was there until I left Hawaii.
So, as you mentioned, when you first started, you were one of six for the whole entire county. So that's a pretty big area. So,
Yes.
but here in Hawaii, at the base, I'm envisioning that this is a lot smaller area. Hawaii, the islands aren't big enough, that big to begin with, but in terms of the base, we're talking about a much smaller area, right?
Absolutely. So the role that I played in the prevention effort, though, was for the Army Pacific. So that included Korea and Japan and
Oh, okay.
yeah, so much wider of an area than a
Okay.
county, but when I moved to CID, it was the installation. And it's not one
Hmm.
installation, it's the installations. There's several installations, there's smaller pockets across the island. But yes, it is definitely in fact smaller than even Merced County.
All right, so multiple areas. So you were dealing with multiple bases then when you were doing prevention. So yeah, that could make it a little bit more challenging, and obviously understanding the activity going around the base would be very helpful, I would think, in terms
Yeah,
of trying to predict what it is, because it's usually like can be outside threats, but in certain cases, as you mentioned, it's an inside threat.
Yeah, especially when it's overseas.
Hmm.
Not only a language barrier, but processes are different when it's off installation. But going back to the prevention models, it really, there are factors in what the Army considers as harmful behaviors, which they were trying to reduce, which is like domestic violence,
Mm-hmm.
suicide. There are a lot of precursors that could be identified, and that's why I believed so with all my everything in this
Mm-hmm.
program, is because the data is there.
Mm-hmm.
We just needed to learn how to use it. And the way that the government would allow information to be used, the limitation, especially with criminal data, was only to the investigative analyst series. And so that's where that role in particular was so important in this Army program.
This may be an obvious question, but why do you think there was so much disconnect between the military law enforcement side and the military health side?
Well, that's a hard one to answer, because the people that were making the decisions at headquarters, I don't think they understood the importance of it. And when they started this program, they kind of came in with blinders and were like, this is how we're going to do it because this is the way CDC does it. But a military community is very different than a traditional city, state, anything, right? Your population is transient, right? Every 3 years, soldiers and their families move, which causes a lot of factors that make it difficult to track people and monitor their behaviors. But that's why I kept pushing, like, if we just had this one database that filtered in everything, then of course, in a perfect world, right?
Mm-hmm.
This would make this process of identifying precursors to harmful behaviors for the prevention efforts, which would ultimately lead to specific training that soldiers and their families might need to reduce ultimate crime and harmful behaviors.
Yeah, there is a lot to that. That's probably an episode in itself.
It's going to actually be my dissertation, so
Oh,
I could talk
okay.
about it all day. Yeah.
All right. Well, okay. Well, let me think about it. We'll come back to that when during the PhD section. You mentioned yesterday in our prep call that there was a situation where you were the only non-doctor in a room full of doctors.
Yes, when I was working in the prevention space, everybody that I worked with in this space was a doctor of public health. And so talk about awkward when you're the only person that's not a doctor and you're introducing yourself to the team and it's doctor, doctor, doctor. And then I'm like, hi, just Erica, no doctor, which is what kind of pushed me in the direction of pursuing my PhD.
Just Erica, huh?
Yeah, just Erica.
Yeah, and that, man, and that could be intimidating. You're already in a situation when I think back during my time as an analyst, or I've witnessed other analysts. You come in even as a civilian, and you're in there. You might be in a ComStat meeting, or you might be in a round table with the chief, right? And you're sitting there at the table there, and you're looking across to all these years of experience and maybe certifications and ranks, and then there you part of the conversation, right? You have literally have a seat at the table, right? You're
Right,
there to talk.
right. Yeah, I not only being the only analyst in this room full of doctors, but yeah, being the only one that wasn't a doctor, I feel knocked me down a peg in the sense that I didn't feel quite as heard. And if I was a doctor, would I have been better heard?
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting situation. Credentialing matters to some folks,
Right,
right? But a good idea is a good idea.
right.
So, all right. As you mentioned, you went on to CID there in Hawaii, and this brings us to your second analyst badge story. And this is dealing with a potential auto theft problem.
Yeah, so last year while I was with CID, we had a temporary special agent in charge come in from Georgia, one of the installations in Georgia. And when he got there, as any good person in charge, is reading up on the blotter, all the reports coming in daily, and he's like, we've got an auto theft problem. There was 2 the other day and there's 2 more today. I'm like, no, there's not. It's just how it is in Hawaii, right? It's not always what the postcard looks like. And so he wanted the data. And so I was able to pull the data from Alerts, which is the Army's RMS, and pulled the data, cleaned it, and started to realize, yeah, there's not a problem. And what I ended up doing with the data was I did a comparison to on installation and off installation per capita. And what happened was it was astronomical off installation. I want to say it was like 53 to every 1,000 off installation and like 0.1 something to per thousand on installation. So it was like, yeah, there's not an auto theft problem, especially when you're comparing yourself to off installation, literally a fence between you, right? And so, but being an analyst, I started to look at the qualitative data and notice that what I was seeing was more property thefts. And when I was reading more and more through this, is MPs were annotating that there were breaches in the perimeter of the installation, and they were all walking distance when I plotted them, all walking distance from these perimeter breaches to where property theft was occurring. So from that, I was able to produce a product and present that to the special agent in charge. And he was like, oh, this is a problem. This is a security problem on an installation, right? And so he wanted me to send it up to kind of a funny story. He said, installation commander. And what did I do? I sent it to the commanding general. And so he calls me and he's like, are you drinking buddies with him? And I was like, no. He was like, I said installation commander, not commanding general. I'm like, oops. Well, he got it and he liked it. So
that's a fortunate mistake, isn't it?
yeah. Yeah, so that was one of the last projects, though, that I worked on when I was with CID. I'm very proud of it, though, because it highlighted, I mean, being in the Pacific in general is a high threat area from an intelligence perspective, but to show that, unfortunately, now our installation is at risk. So hopefully they did.
So were the auto thefts being miscategorized, or you discovered the security breach when you were analyzing, looking after the auto thefts?
Kind of both. That is definitely a thing that the MP Corps acknowledges. You've got brand new privates putting in reports less than 6 months in the Army, to senior people that are writing reports, and just human error, right? So it as tedious as it was, I did start to go through certain categories of the crime categories. And so that was what, when I was going through that and reading through the reports, is when I was like, okay, not only they're miscategorized, but this is what actually is the problem.
And give me an idea from the fence that you were talking about being accessed to like the civilian property. Like, is it just like right across the street is like an apartment complex, or is it pretty far from the fence to civilian world?
Yeah, so depends on the installation, but Schofield Barracks, literally there's a shopping area. It's not even really a shopping area. It's like a bar and a couple of restaurants across the street, tattoo parlor. But yes, there are apartments, and they are low income. It's kind of a rough area. There's also an area near the installation property that a lot of the homeless encampments are. So that was one of the things that the MPs were kind of responsible to do, was clear the homeless population off the federal property. Unfortunately, you have to send out hazmat crews and stuff like that when you move homeless populations from their areas.
Hi, I'm Kyle Stoker, and I'm encouraging you to vote in the IACA elections. So make sure you go to the IACA website and vote, because our membership has a voice in who leads the organization, and you want to make sure that your voice is heard. Thank you very much.
Hello, this is Joshua Todd, U.S. Border Patrol, Buffalo Sector Intelligence at Wellesley Island Station. And I'd like you to remember that numbers on the page are reflective of the humans that we serve. We've had a recent report of an overdose in the county, and we discussed it at a local meeting. And then later that day, I went to the barber and got a haircut, and the woman was visibly distraught. And we got to chatting, and it was actually her son that overdosed and passed away that last week. So while we do a lot of reports and they are numbers on the spreadsheet, they end up reflecting the humans that we do serve.
Well, as you mentioned, up moving on from Hawaii, you go to DC, but I thought it was interesting when I talked to you yesterday in the prep call. I asked you if you missed Hawaii, and your answer is
No, absolutely not. My pocketbook, so they say, likes it more here in DC. Yeah.
Oh man, that is funny.
Everybody's always shocked. Like, really? You don't miss Hawaii? And it's like, go live there. The B-52 bombers, aka their cockroaches that fly. Yeah. Not fun.
Oh man, paradise isn't what it's thought to be, huh?
Yeah, exactly. They don't show those in the postcards.
Oh man. All right. So, but DC has its own character in itself. So
Yes.
let's get into that a little bit. How was that transition? What are you up to in DC?
So I left Hawaii for a position as an instructor with the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is where I'm currently at. What I do is I'm part of a 9-week long program where I teach our foreign partners the U.S. intelligence process. So
Okay.
we have the basic intelligence analyst course. We have, it's called NIC, which is the National Intelligence Capabilities. And then we have the final course, which was my primary course. It was a 1 week, as part of this whole 9-week course program, was intel support to multinational operations. I will say I've had such a great time with some really amazing students, amazing coworkers as well. But to work with our foreign partners and get their perspective of not just intel, but our way of life compared to theirs. So I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah. So are most of these English speaking students?
Yeah, so they have to test to a certain English competency score. A lot of them do speak very, very good English. There's been one or two that they're quiet and struggle a little bit because their English just isn't what I think was expected.
Okay. But that's gotta be a fascinating discussion. Is your classroom diverse in that the students are spread out all over from different countries, or are you basically teaching maybe one group that's all from the same country at a time?
No, so it's always several different countries. What was really interesting was the group of students that came in during the election. That was really interesting to get their perspective as somebody that's not an American. And then, of course, outside the classroom, we would have socials and stuff. And so during those times is when we got a little bit more ourselves instead of instructor personality. And they would ask, like, what is your honest opinion? And it's like, well, I don't speak for the rest of America, right? And that's the great thing about being an American. We all have our different views and perspective, right, wrong, or indifferent. But, what they thought all Americans were, they got to see me as an American and say, oh, you guys aren't all the same.
You're not some arrogant prick.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would really enjoy that role because I would love to just listen to their stories and their perspectives and hear their backstory and also get into what they think. And just as you mentioned, like this is what they think of America is, or this is how they would define it or articulate it.
Exactly. Yep.
Huh. Yeah. And to have a different, like from all over the world be
Yeah.
like that over 9 weeks and to have socials, right? To kind of get out of the classroom and let your hair down, so to speak.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. Yep. It
um,
was. I mean, we had Asian students, we had African students,
mhm.
lots of European students. We have quite a few Middle Eastern students that came in. But yeah, a very different perspective. And being the only female instructor, it was interesting for me because some cultures and countries, you don't directly talk to women. And
Mm.
so my coworkers had to say that while you're in America, you act as an American and you will respect her just like you respect me, and you can talk to her. She's just another person in the classroom. And so it was never an issue.
Just different customs, different perspectives, different values. Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
interesting. All right, then let's move on. Then let's get into some advice for our listeners. So that could be new analysts, experienced analysts, maybe a return on investment, something they could study now that might be important 5 years from now. What do you got for our listeners?
I would say advice for someone looking to enter the profession. I would say there's a lot of ways to get in. During the prep call, you and I kind of talked about it. Sometimes it's who you know, or if you're within an agency, and sometimes it requires a criminal justice degree. One
Hmm.
thing I would say, especially to students or people with a criminal justice degree that are interested in the crime analysis field, is join the associations, whether it be IACA or ILEA, as a student and start making connections that way. One of the things that I did when I started with Merced County is I was paying for my own training because
Mm.
I wanted to improve me. So start where you are. Don't wait until you actually land a job to learn skills. Use free data sets to sharpen your, especially Excel. I know that's where my bread and butter is, and but where a lot of us are transitioning to like Power BI and Tableau and Python. So that would be another thing that I would recommend that they get into. But definitely connections, even your local chapter of some of the crime analysts, build your network for sure, and be curious. The best analysts that I know are not actually the ones with the fanciest tools, or the ones that kind of had to make it work with what they had.
Hmm.
And remember, your work has to be done to be understood, because communication in the analyst role is so important. As far as a more focused response to your question would be to fellow veterans. So for this, I would say veterans with service connected PTSD, which I've experienced firsthand. I want to be upfront with other veterans who are considering this field. Some police departments do hesitate, not always for fair reasons, but they often have some concerns, equating it to instability or assuming you can't handle stressful material or situations. Agencies may worry about security or confidentiality, but unfortunately, there is still a stigma, just in general, but also in policing, where PTSD is kind of seen as a weakness. The hiring process can be very invasive depending on the agencies, not just a regular full background, but medical exams and release of records, psychological evaluations, and even polygraphs. Those steps can make agencies cautious if they think a diagnosis might raise questions. But Here's what I want other veterans to hear clearly is that PTSD does not define your ability to succeed. Many of us manage it effectively, perform at a high level. In my own case, I've proven that through years of service, earning multiple degrees and certifications, and now with me in my pursuit of my PhD in criminal justice and criminology, the discipline and resilience and problem solving skills that veterans provide and bring to a table are exactly what makes us strong analysts. So if you're a veteran thinking about this career field, don't let the stigma discourage you. Be open about your strengths, highlight your ability to perform under pressure, and know that federal laws protect you from discrimination as long as you can perform your essential duties. This profession needs voices and skills like yours.
So I'm assuming that there's a rating system for PTSD, right? And is this something that you received from the military?
No, through the Veterans Affairs.
Mm-hmm.
So when I separated, I took a medical retirement,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know what the exact science is behind ratings. I don't think anybody knows. I don't think the VA actually knows. But
Just gave you a number.
yeah, it's like they throw a dart and whatever you got is what you got. But they take all your medical records and they evaluate it and see if there's any things that have occurred to you during your service that may have a lifelong impact. And so, like I said, for me, I got injured during basic training, so I have some feet, ankle issues, but most importantly is my 2 combat tours, one during the surge where I was in Iraq in the heart of Baghdad for 15 months. And that was a really bad time to be there, obviously, except for the initial invasion, but it was very traumatic. So some of us, well, all of us that go to a combat zone, we don't come back the same. And that doesn't make you weak, but it makes you different. So
Yeah. I mean, I think it's hard too because, I mean, when you don't get a job just normally, they don't tell you why you didn't get the job, let alone if, as you mentioned, there was concerns about your PTSD rating.
yes, it was brought to my attention that a recent position that I had gone through all the bells and whistles for, at the end of it there was 2 concerns. One was my PTSD and the other was my jobs, how many jobs I've had, which talking to a VA counselor, they're like, this is totally normal. Veterans, you want, when you're a veteran, you've served, and when you get into the civilian sector, you want to continue serving, and so you're always like trying to find that job that one fulfills you but also makes you feel like you're providing a service back, right? And so none of as I've transitioned through my careers, none of them were negative. They were all in pursuit of promotion and growing. But they knew that when I interviewed because they had my resume. So in saying that as an analyst, right, stomp, made me draw to the conclusion that before the interview and before they offered me anything, they didn't know about my PTSD. And the fact that it was mentioned that maybe this would be a concern to leadership makes me believe that that's what it was. But because of legal reasons, of course, when I asked the agency, like, can you let me know? And of course, I want to know so that I can grow, right? I want to know so that I can fix it if possible. But they were absolutely insistent that they could not and would not tell me why that decision was made. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's tough. That is tough because you're right. I think most people, I'm like, okay, what do I need to improve on? How do I get the next job during the next hiring process that I'm in? And you want that feedback, just as you mentioned, to grow. I understand that departments get sued all the time and it's a CYA situation, but from your point of view or from anybody's point of view, what do I need to do or what do I need to improve on because I'm willing to do it.
Right. Exactly.
Oh, all right. Well, let's talk about your PhD now. As you mentioned that, and I laughed when you said in the beginning when you were talking about, you're as a young adult, you didn't think college education was in your future, and then so you went to the military, and here you're on like your fifth degree, getting your PhD, which kudos to you. This is getting a PhD is quite an endeavor.
Yeah, maturity that's just not
Hmm.
there when you're 18, 19 years
Yeah,
old and
yeah,
you're still living with your parents.
yeah.
But after some growing up in the Army, it was free while I was in, right?
Hmm.
So I took advantage of that, and I had some amazing leaders while I was in that supported attending college. So I did. And part of the all source analyst training in the Army, you can basically buy college credits that translate to what those courses are. All source analysts go to school for an extended period of time, and each course aligned with a course that this university had offered. And so all I pretty much needed to do was my general ed, and I knocked that out. Got my associates before I left active duty, and then the time between when I left active duty to when I started working with Merced County, I had actually started my bachelor's. That's when I started to use my post 9/11 GI Bill, and I pumped out my degree in a ridiculous amount of time. Like I was taking like 8 courses a semester. I had
Oh,
no life. So I wasn't working other than my reserve duties. So yeah, life was school. And so I got my bachelor's and was like, okay, I'm done. I'm going to focus on my career as an analyst with the county. And that's what I did for a while. But when COVID happened during that break, I decided, why not go back to school? Let's work on your master's. So that's when I went back for my master's, finished that in a year, and then was like, okay, I'm done. And then that's when the conversation I had with Colonel Franta that pushed me in the direction of going back to school with University of Texas at San Antonio for their intelligence studies program, and ultimately led me getting back into the career field. And as we discussed earlier, being the only person not a doctor in the room was what pushed me towards working on my PhD in criminal justice and criminology, because that's what I love.
wow. So you mentioned that earlier that you're studying both health and criminology. So what is your thesis going to be on?
So it's a spin on the Army's program. The Integrated Prevention Advisory Group is what it's called, IPAG for short. The intent behind it is taking a public health model and like establishing crime prevention efforts. I don't want to say crime because some of the things aren't crime, like
Hmm.
suicide, but harmful behavior prevention, right? And so
Mm.
there's so many studies of it now versus like a couple years ago when I was in this field that show the partnership where law enforcement seek public health to partner together to combat crime
Hmm.
and protect the community and crime prevention efforts and yada yada yada, right?
Hmm.
I just feel like it's kind of the reverse in the Army right now, as they're kind of building the plane as it flies, so to speak, where they're creating this program from a public health perspective, trying to prevent crime and harmful behaviors, but not seeing the value in crime data.
Hmm.
So
All right.
that's what I want to look at, is the success of law enforcement and public health in the
Hmm.
communities. There's the success stories that could possibly be implemented in the Army communities.
Yeah. So are you specifically going to study in the military environment?
Well, so after talking to some of my professors,
Hmm.
it's more of a study of the success behind law enforcement partnering with public health,
Hmm.
but taking those success stories and how it could be implemented
Hmm.
in the military communities. So it's not a focus specifically on the military communities, but rather the civilian, the law enforcement aspect of it in communities across the US taking those success stories and applying them into the military communities. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
It does. No. And so I see on your resume, expected 2027. So you got a couple years yet.
Yes, I've got 3 more courses to finish, like traditional classes, and then the rest of the classes through 2027, anticipated 2027, is working on my actual dissertation. So.
All right. Well, good luck on that. I told you yesterday, I got a master's degree, but oh, man, I do not want to read another textbook ever again. And I am not a reader. I do not like to read, so I'm actually a little bit jealous of people that go on to get their PhD because I know it's so much work that you have to do. So it's quite an accomplishment.
Well, with today's technology, I will say digital textbooks and a lot of it can be converted to audio. And so because I'm more of an audio learner, I can listen to the audiobook of things. Or even if I'm reading a research study, there's an app that I use that just reads it to me. And so I can absorb it that way without actually sitting down and physically reading it. So that's what I do. It's kind of a cheat, but
I don't know. I think that's what my son does though too. So I never see him actually reading, but he tells me he reads. So I think he does listen to the books on tape. So all right. Well, hey, as I said, that's awesome though. That's a great endeavor. So I'm looking forward to hearing your results. Let's go on to some volunteer opportunities that you are into. Skull Games. You volunteer for Skull Games.
Yes, I do. I recommend it to anybody out there that might be interested. I got introduced to it while I was working with Army CID. The team that I specifically worked with was sex crimes. And so what Skull Games does, if you're not familiar, is they work with law enforcement partners and they help identify victims and traffickers so that the police can run with it. It's all publicly available information, but it's quite an event when you can participate. And did one operation in Hawaii with Kelly. She's a representative out in Hawaii. She's awesome. But I would definitely recommend it. It's OSINT heavy, obviously, with publicly available information, and it's for a good cause and identifying victims and helping them get the justice that they deserve.
So is it ongoing or is it a specific period of time?
No, it's ongoing. So once you become a member, there are actual cases that you can work. And so it's ongoing, but they do have specific events where they will have people in person come together with a law enforcement agency and they'll do a game. And then they'll even have people virtually help support that operation to identify and find all the information needed to identify the victim and trafficker.
Very cool. Yeah, we'll put a link in the show notes for additional information for those that may be interested. Another thing you volunteered for, we volunteered together. We were recently part of a IACA working group looking to improve the elections and ethics process, and I can just hear the groans and moans in the audience right now those that may be sick of hearing about IACA issues, but we went through that together. So I just wanted to give you a moment and talk about the working group and your perspective.
I think it was a good opportunity to get involved to try to fix or help advise the board on adjustments that might need to be made. I will say it was a very, very short period of time with everybody working their full-time jobs and volunteering to do this on the side. There was a lot to do. It was very time consuming, but I think at the end of the day, those of us that stuck through the whole thing did the best we could with the limited time we were allowed. But I definitely think it was for a good cause.
Yeah. I mean, we only had 8 weeks. I mean, and those are 2 meaty issues, right? Like you
Yes.
easily could have spent 6 months probably on each, and that's with meeting every Friday.
Right.
So it is tough, and there was a lot of good conversation, I thought, going on. But yeah, I think most people are feeling that we needed more time, and we're not necessarily sure where this is going. Are the recommendations going to be implemented, or what's the next steps?
Yeah, I'm hoping that this is a first step to
Mm-hmm.
making the association better. It's not perfect, we all know that, but we can definitely make the efforts to try to make it better. And I think doing that is having working groups to look at ways to improve. So,
Yep.
yeah.
All right. Well, very good. I don't know why I just thought about this. This is a really random question that has nothing to do with what we were just talking about. Just to warn you. How old is your daughter? Is your daughter graduated? Did she stay in Hawaii? Is she with you in DC?
Oh Lord, no, she just turned 11.
Okay.
She just started the 6th grade, so no,
Okay.
she is well traveled
I
with
see.
everywhere we've been. But yeah, no, I've got a few more years before I can boot her out to college.
I see. I see. But she's in DC. I lived in Baltimore before I had kids.
Hmm.
And so we would have family and friends come down to visit us in Baltimore, and we would spend a day in Baltimore, and then we'd spend the day down in DC
Hmm.
and going to the monuments, riding the metro and on all of that. And I know I didn't appreciate it until I had kids. And then I'm like, there's been several times it's like, oh, I wish DC was just an hour drive away to go take the kids. We've taken the kids there once, but I definitely miss it being just right there.
Yeah, we actually live in Alexandria, so
Mm-hmm.
right next to a metro stop, so it's an
Yeah.
easy into the city. I love it. She is not interested in history. Um,
Must
I
take after her
sometimes,
dad.
yeah, exactly. I'm like, how is she my child? But yeah, I mean, I love it. And we actually just had this conversation last night, and she's like, but there's nothing to do. And I was like, we're in the nation's capital. What do you mean there's nothing to do? She's like, it's all boring old people stuff and history. And I'm like, oh my gosh, no. Like, we can go to a Nets game. It's literally like a handful of stops down the road, and
Yeah.
yeah, kids.
Yep. 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 Oh man. Yep. That's probably exactly how it would have been with my kids had we stayed in Baltimore. Oh man. But all right. Very good. Well, our last segment to this show, Erica, is Words to the World. This is where you can promote any idea that you wish. What are your words to the world?
One thing I would hope that people take away from this conversation is that analysis is never just about the data. It's about the people. Every chart, every report, every product that we create connects back to someone's safety and someone's future. I've carried that perspective with me from the Army to law enforcement and now into the research as I pursue my PhD. And it's the same perspective I bring as a mom, because at the end of the day, we're all trying to build something safer and better for the next generation. So my message is keep learning, keep asking questions, keep serving in whatever way you can. And that's how we move our communities forward.
Very good. Well, I leave every guest with you've given me just enough to talk bad about you later.
Sounds good.
But I do appreciate you being on the show, Erica. Thank
Thank you.
you so much, and you be
Thank
safe.
you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you for making it to the end of another episode of Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. You can show your support by sharing this and other episodes found on our website at www.leapodcasts.com. If you have a topic you would like us to cover or have a suggestion for our next guest, please send us an email at leapodcasts@gmail.com. Till next time, analysts, keep talking.